We're streaming when you are ready to begin.
You are live.
Now my mic's on. Okay, let's get started, please. Welcome everyone to this evening's Board of Adjustment meeting. We do a roll call. Anyone?
Member Ip? Member Painter?
Present.
As I understand it, Member Alexander is excused. Member Friedman?
Present.
Chair. Member Winston? So, Member Deering? And Member Douglas?
Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And if we could do the Pledge of Allegiance. Colleen, do you want to lead us? All rise. Could I have a motion to approve this evening's agenda, please?
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. And motion to approve the minutes of the April 2nd, 2024 meeting. Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. So we had old business, which was case number 2022-6149. But before that, approval of findings and conclusions, findings of fact, conclusions of law. We have a motion with respect to that. I have a second.
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. So our old business is case number 2022-6149. Annual review of 513A Camino de los Marquez special use permit. And Carly, could you talk about this case?
Yes, I would be happy to, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to set up really quickly.
Chair Friedman, while Carly is setting up, just wanted to let you know that the stenographer tonight, Xavier Behill works with the city clerk's office and is a notary and will be swearing folks in. And then the stenographer will be separate going forward. So I just wanted to introduce you to Xavier.
Hi, Xavier. Thank you for doing this evening.
Nice to meet you all.
Friedman,
Yes.
at what point should I recuse myself from this case?
On this particular case, this would be the time. So you can recuse yourself, you can state the reason, or you can just say you feel you have appearance of a conflict. and you can-
There's an appearance of a conflict. I know the applicant, so.
Well, thank you for doing so
Mhm.
and letting us know. Go ahead, Carly.
Thank you, Chair Friedman. I'm currently attempting to share my screen. IT in the background, if you could help me swap this with the TV.
And Mr. Chair, are you able to hear me?
Yes, very well.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Chair, if I could address the board just briefly, I just wanted to note that Member Ip may wish to leave the room at this point if she's going to be recusing from this matter.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, come on back.
Come get you.
Well, you want, we'll take a break after this and we'll come get you. Could you order some pizza while you're out there? Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, good evening, folks, board members. Thank you for joining us this evening. Old business is starting us, and it's the annual review of the Zoomies Doggy Daycare case, and it's 513 Camino de los Marquez. As Chair Friedman said, this is a case that was seen previously, case number 2022-6149, and they're in front of us again this evening as one of their various conditions of approval associated with their special use permit granted in June 2023. So, to remind you all, a special use permit is intended to provide flexibility, regulate, and prevent uses within various districts. Not only this, but certain uses, in particular doggy daycares, veterinarian establishments, are required to obtain special use permits within 200 feet of residential uses in order to reduce or avoid conflicts. A quick summary of what happened in June 2023. They appeared before you on June 6th due to a noise complaint from the neighbors. They had installed a puppy patch, an unpermitted puppy patch in the rear of their property, the 1 acre property that they had Suite A of, without a special use permit within 200 feet of a residential use. At that time, the Board of Adjustment approved the special use permit and the expansion of Zoomies Doggy Daycare, which include both a phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1 was supposed to be the modification as well as improvement of their current 4 existing playrooms. And phase 2, as highlighted on the right there by the yellow transparent blocks, was showing the expansion into playroom playroom E, and the movement and relocation of their lobby. There were 14 conditions of approval that you decided on as a body in June 2023. I will walk you through all of those this evening, along with the status of their completion as of the beginning of this month, yesterday, July 1st. So, of the 14, the first one is them returning before this board on the annual. So they have completed this since we did not come together during June. 2, should the special use permit be approved, there would be 3 site visits conducted. 2 were conducted by our inspector's official, that was Kevin Smith, and 1 was conducted by planning staff, specifically Margaret Moore and myself on May 17th. Those first 2 are completed, and I will tell you more about that staff visit later in this presentation. As for the additional condition 3, flooring and vertical surfaces up to 4 feet in height within all playrooms, enclosures shall be improved. This is partial completion because this is only an improvement made in playroom E, where clients are not currently held, clients being the dogs. 4, soundproofing measures are incomplete as well. Those are only complete in room E, and they are not complete along the party wall in that main room A. Moving along to 5, the dumpster is yet to be appropriately enclosed and gated. 6, on staff visits, all doors and windows appeared to be closed and remain closed. 7, regarding noise compliance, they have been in compliance. There have not been any additional noise complaints. 8, moving on to the next slide. Pet waste shall be double bagged. This has been in compliance. We have not received any additional complaints about this condition of approval. As for 9, they have not applied for any building permits because none of their internal changes required building permits. So this is considered incomplete at this time due to the other requirements. 10, applicant shall paint the curb along the northern side of Camino de los Marquez. It's also incomplete, and I do have photos of that. They would also put together a no parking stencil along that road. 11, Should the special use permit be approved, applicant shall renew city business license and animal care permit that was achieved. 12, provide a landscape plan design that was done and they worked with the technical review staff on that. As for 13 and 14, regards to ADA compliance, these are currently unaddressed still, including entrances to their building and the surrounding sidewalk infrastructure. These will be addressed at construction. However, there has not been an agreement between the applicant as Zoomies and the owner of their building. So a quick summary, because I know those 14 are pretty tough to follow. Just to recap, 7 of those 14 have been completed. Since June 2023, the applicant expanded into Suite C. That's the area where they're not holding any clients just yet, but they do have full soundproofing as well as the required conditions for the flooring and wall impermeable surfaces. When we went on May 17th, we were able to see that a lot of the conditions that were assigned to them as conditions of approval in June 2023 were still unresolved. So when we went, we spoke to their architect, Hugh Grant, and we walked through the entire property. I have some photos from that day. In response to their appearance here today, they have outlined their required improvements as 2 phases. The first one being moisture and sound control, and then phase 2 being those phase 2 improvements that they brought to you in June 2023, including the relocation of the lobby and entrance, playroom upgrades required, sound control, accessibility improvements, and the dumpster enclosure all required. So as promised, here are the photos of the parking accessibility and site circulation. Staff observed while we were there on May 17th, people actively parking there to pick up and drop off their dogs for extended periods of time. And as you can see, that yellow striping has not been redone. The applicant must redesign and upgrade their parking lot in the rear of the building, which has not been done yet, with 20 spaces, as well as include 2 4-space bike racks to meet the 8-space requirement, pardon me. Improvements that you see here just haven't been made, along with a couple other aspects I want to highlight that were highlighted in the report. The adverse noise impacts for the adjacent businesses still persist because that party wall has not gotten any soundproofing. However, they have seized outside access for dogs, so that puppy patch that was installed is no longer creating an issue. Waste disposal, while they have been double bagging, they haven't enclosed or gated their trash receptacle. So that has not been fulfilled as previously stated. And they worked with DRT members, design review team members, to design those landscape improvements, but they have still not enclosed or buffered it. So to wrap this all up, with all of those conditions, 7 of the 14 being met, and those specific points that I called out even further, staff was pretty hesitant to suggest approval due to, half of these conditions not in compliance. If the board is to continue approval of this special use permit, we suggest a site visit, not only by staff, but the Board of Adjustment in attendance as well, within 6 months. You can also opt to be closer to this date that we're at now, as well as another appearance before the board in the next year. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know there are a lot of conditions.
Thank you, Carly. Are there any questions from the board?
Did you mean ceased?
Correct. Yes. Apologies.
Because ceased would be too proud, but
Correct. Apologies.
Yes.
Can you go back to the slide that shows the phases to complete the 17 outstanding items?
So
Yeah, cool. Yeah,
this one?
sorry, you passed by it. You talked, the next phase is phase 1 is moisture control, and then phase 2 is, the remaining of this. How do you have an understanding of how, like, the time frame for completing these phases, and then the dependency on the tenant and the landlord reaching an agreement? How much, where's the dependency in those?
Right. So moisture, sound control, accessibility improvements, and dumpster enclosure were all supposed to be completed before they arrived here before you. as their annual review. However, it's still unclear where their timeline is because of the lack of an agreement between the owner of the building and the applicant, Zumiez.
There's no proposed associated timeline with completing these.
No board member.
Yes.
And in terms of phase one and phase two, who determined those phases?
This phase one and phase two was determined by the applicant. When we brought it to their attention that we were nearing the June deadline, they submitted a letter that was supplied with our packet this evening, written to Margaret Moore, outlining these phase one and phase two items. So it was really determined by them.
So, a lot of us were here at the previous, Board of Adjustment meeting where we granted, conditional approval. And if I recall, the applicant had bought the business from a pre-existing, Dougie Daycare Center that had been there before, that had not been in complaints, but no one ever complained. And I could not recall if at that point, if the applicant owned the building or not, but you're telling us that the applicant was not the owner of the building.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We know I assume the city knows who the owner is.
Yes, they're on record, I believe, within
Yep.
our GAS system.
Have we had any discussions with the owner?
We have not had a discussion with the owner at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions from the board? Okay, I assume the applicant is here. We could hear from the applicant. That would be great. Thank you so much, Carly. Remember, folks, when you come up, you have to give your name and address and be sworn in.
Please raise your right hand, state your name and address for the record.
Hugh Driscoll, 695 Calle Espejo.
You solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you have in reference to this item shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, and do this under the penalties of perjury?
I do.
Mr. Driscoll is sworn in, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
I'm an architect here in Santa Fe. I was brought on by Zumiez to assist them in the process of obtaining building permits for the items they need, both for the special use permit and also for their own improvements, just for the business itself. This project is essentially like one of those games with all the squares on a grid, where in order to access one piece, you have to slide some others. So in this case, those little squares are dogs. Playroom E, which is, I believe in your packet, it's the newest space that's been improved with finishes, is where dogs are moving to from B and C, so that the spaces B and C may be improved. Once those two spaces can be occupied, then the animals can move out of A and what will become D, and the improvements can be made in there. And all those need to be in sequence so that we can have proper egress from the building and relocate the lobby to the back of the building away from the no parking zone, which is out in front. So there's a sequence for these improvements. Right now, as Carly mentioned, the improvements have been made to Playroom E, and the dogs will be in that space very soon. We just got power from PNM, took about 2 months. There were code violations and things to be upgraded. We worked with the city and with PNM to improve those. And so that power switched on a few days ago. So we are preparing to move dogs into that space. So they'll be out of B and C, and then the improvements can continue. It's waterproofing, essentially. We've got floors in that first 4 feet of wall space. What other questions can I answer for you?
I think it'd be helpful if you went through a timeline of the items that haven't been completed and give us a very careful, thought out, reasonable time frame for when they will be completed.
To give you specific dates, I'd have to consult with the owner and with the landlord. But I can tell you that we have drawings prepared for the trash enclosure, which will be the first piece. In the parking area, currently what was a loading dock to the back does not meet ADA requirements. There is a ramp, but it's extremely steep. It doesn't pass any of the ADA requirements. So we have proposed, it's shown in your drawings that you have in the packet. There is a ramp that's over in the corner and it's adjacent to a new accessible parking space. That ramp is a low slope ramp. So technically it's a sidewalk. It's not so steep as to qualify as a ramp, but it is a sloping surface that gets you up to where the new lobby will be accessed on that north side of the building. So the trash enclosure is a piece there, and that the ramp and the landscaping adjacent, those are also significant portions of that. These are permanent pieces of infrastructure that the landlord will be involved in funding, and that is a negotiation that is ongoing. The other pieces on the inside are, I can tell you that E is complete and B and C should start in the next 2 weeks. The middle space would go once that is completed and we can shift the animals around out of the center of the building.
Any other questions? Yes.
The owner and the general manager are also here. There's no presentation planned from them, but they're here for your questions.
Yeah, if they're going to talk, we'll swear them in. We have specific questions for them.
I'd just like to know, I don't know who will answer it, but when this was presented to us a year ago, there didn't seem to be any issue about having to get with the landlord and getting everything worked out, blah, 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 blah. How come it wasn't done then? And how come it's taken a year to get into discussions with the landlord to find out who's going to do what and when it's going to begin? It seems like it's been a lot of dragging feet up to this point.
I can answer as someone who came into this project in April of this year, that the discussion of completion of all of these pieces as a prerequisite for this meeting was not raised. It was a update on the progress.
There seems to be a lack of progress. That's why it seems like there should be something in place, that an agreement between the owners and the business owner as to when things are going to move forward. I mean, you're telling us if the landlord is not inclined to make any agreements over the next 12 months, then next year when you're back here in front of us again, we're going to be having the same discussion again, which I don't want to do.
I'm going to defer to the owner.
Please raise your right hand, state your name and address for the record.
Stephen Biles, 4507 South Cole, Gilbert, Arizona.
You solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you have in reference to this item shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, and do this under the penalties of perjury?
Yes, I swear.
Sir Biles is sworn in, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
The challenge we've had is, as you mentioned, it's been an ongoing negotiation. And as of today, we've invested about 200,000 in capital so far. And we have an estimated 200,000 more to go to get to the finish line. And that's not counting what we perceive as the landlord's portion. So long story short, that ultimately it's my problem. And I've been trying to work with the landlord to get to a resolution. We've had some counsel involved in the discussion as well. And at this point, if necessary, I'll push forward and just handle the expenses myself if necessary to help us get to the finish line and deal with any dispute with the landlord at a later time.
Question?
Follow up with them. So if what I understood you to say, or sound like what you were saying, is the landlord is not opposed to the improvements being made. He's just not saying he's gonna pay for it. Is that-
It's my understanding that our landlord actually has an architectural background, and she's proposed an alternative to the backyard scenario that our architect has put forward. And I believe that proposal might be with the city right now with Margaret to review. And ultimately, she proposed a different option because she thinks she could do it cheaper, which is fine. If everyone's okay with it, we're fine with that. But kind of as Hugh mentioned, it's a step-by-step process. We haven't been able to do the back parking lot area because the back parking lot area hasn't been done. We haven't been able to finalize the lobby, which has some issues with the way the building is put together and what would need to be changed and how we do ultimately do the ADA compliance ramp as well. So we're waiting for that, but we've been pushing ahead with the other part of it. And I think maybe as soon as a month from now, we could be completely done with our inside renovation as we're able to move the dogs over to the new suite and start juggling the construction on the other side. In fact, I think I'm looking at my construction manager, but I think they're preparing to start that work as soon as the next couple of days. So I think that'll be a pretty quick turnaround that we could get the epoxy down on the floors, get the soundproofing, get the walls properly coated with FRP as well for safety and hygiene. So we think that part will turn around really quick. The wild card has been getting resolution with the landlord. We've just got a lot of non-responsiveness. And like I said, at this point, I'm willing to just move forward and deal with that as a side issue.
You realize that if we actually come back in 6 months or 8 months or a year, whatever, you still haven't been able to get the landlord on board and you spent $300,000 on it, you may be in jeopardy of losing everything.
I understand.
Board Member Deering.
Yeah, just sort of a follow-up on Member Painter's question. So you're saying, so you can't get the landlord and you need to move on and you're willing to basically pony up the money, right, to get it done. Is the landlord opposed to the current plan that you have or just the cost of the plan that the landlord assumes can be done differently or more inexpensively?
I think it was mainly just the cost of the plan. We actually had an unforeseen electrical issue too, which is typically a landlord responsibility. That was a $40,000-$50,000 expense. And we ended up funding that as well. And that's a classic landlord responsibility. So we're having those two challenges that we have. But yes, we'll pony it up and get it moving forward.
But to be clear, the landlord is not opposed to the plan. You have just the cost of it.
No, they're not opposed to it. They're wanting cost cutting and easier way to do it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Follow up one more question. It would seem the easy thing to do would be to paint the curb and all that, but I assume you don't want to stop people from dropping off in front until you get the back finished. Is that correct?
Correct. And we actually did an open house of the new suite last night, and it we had a big monsoon right in the middle of it, but it went pretty well. And I think they're all able to park along that side street, and it's still kind of efficient for clients to park there. And then they have the back area once we get that all fixed up as well. So it worked well. And yet to answer your question, yeah, that's been the delay.
One other question, if I may. The dumpster you have out there, the picture I saw, it looked like your typical kind of old beat up dumpster. Are there better dumpsters you can get that kind of seal up when you close them? I know restaurants, I think, have things that kind of hopefully hide that smell or whatever they would call it,
we are locking it, so that's an upgrade from last time. But as far as the dumpster itself, I would maybe defer. Do we have options there, Joe? Sure.
And if you could also address the delay, I mean, it seems like low hanging fruit to build an enclosure around the dumpster. I would like you to address that, why it's taken a year.
Please raise your right hand, state your name and address for the record.
Joseph Cruz, 611 East Gable Avenue, Mesa, Arizona.
Do you solemnly swear, or do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you have in reference to this item shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, and do this under the penalties of perjury?
I do.
Mr. Cruz is sworn in, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
And to address the issue with the garbage and the garbage enclosure and your question about providing an upgrade. Unfortunately, after the last Board of Adjustment meeting, that was an upgraded dumpster, but we can continue looking for better measures until we have the approval for the enclosure. I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't recall your question.
I'm wanting you to address why it's taken a year to build an enclosure around the dumpster.
From my understanding, with consulting with the architects, the dumpster enclosure also incorporates how the parking lot layout was going to be and how the parking spots were going to line up in order for us to be in a proper compliance, also with the ADA ramp as well.
I guess your question is, why can't you do the enclosure now? You make a plan for what the parking is going to look like and then create the enclosure now. What's stopping that from occurring? Is that?
Or even a temporary enclosure to address the visual impact.
By all means, we are willing to do that. We can make a temporary enclosure. We can put a permanent enclosure in there now that we have a better understanding on how the ADA compliance ramp is going to map out.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant or Mr. Cruz?
Again, I'm concerned about time frame. I mean, if you come back in front of us and this stuff isn't done, that's a problem.
I understand.
All right, please. My first question was to your architect. Can you give us a reasonable time frame for when the things are going to be done? I haven't gotten an answer to that yet.
As I mentioned, there are drawings that could be submitted in a short time frame for the enclosure for the dumpster. And for I can't give you a time frame without having the client. The client is either the landlord or Zumiez. And the person that is paying for it is the applicant along with their contractor for that work. And that's being negotiated. If I was going to tell you how long would that take to create those drawings and submit for permit, it's a month or so. And then through the public process of that approval.
Okay. Maybe the applicant can shed some more light on that. Mr. Biles?
I think as far as completing the indoor portion, I think we could get that knocked out in a month. I'm not as much of an expert on what would be required in the parking lot, but if it's just a matter of redoing the asphalt, striping, doing some cosmetic stuff in the parking lot, I would imagine that could be done in a similar time frame of 1 to 3 months at the longest, if not shorter. So I think 6 months for sure.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Maybe sooner. As fast as we can.
Other questions? Yes. Colleen?
Can you tell us when the negotiations with the landlord about the exterior improvements started?
Immediately after. For the longest time, we've tried to, we actually paid rent on that suite for a year without using it. We were, anxious to start using it. And we just got a whole lot of non-response. I finally got my lease counsel involved in the discussion. And we facilitated a meeting. Approximately 6 months ago, we had that meeting with council. And it seemed to be moving along okay, acceptance of responsibilities. And then since then, it's just been a lot of slow going since then. And then that unforeseen electrical issue came up with, I think it was actually varmints in the building, chewed up all of the electrical, which put a hold on a lot of our project. And we had to get that done before we could go to step B, C, and D. And again, we were looking for the landlord to step up and take that electrical $60,000 financial responsibility, and they weren't willing to do that. So we funded that. And then in the background, we still had this parking lot issue.
Out of curiosity, I assume you've looked at your lease or had your attorney look at the lease in detail. Just as a matter of disclosure, myself and Commissioner Winston are both real estate attorneys in Santa Fe. I was wondering what the lease says about, does the lease have a clause in it that says the landlord represents that the building is in accordance with code and, you know, all rules, regulations, and law?
Now, being a lawyer, I wouldn't be able to answer that very well, but my lawyer felt that we were in good stead to have that responsibility fall on the landlord. And the landlord was accepting responsibility just at her pace.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your answering our questions. Yes. Yes, okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Yes.
I have a clarifying question for staff's recommendation on conditions for approval. You said approve, but a 6-month visit. Would that visit at 6 months be a documentation, or would it be effectively have the ability to repeal the special use permit at that time?
At this point, we have assessed and would like to document further. In this attempt, we would like to invite you with us on an official visit so you may see the current conditions. Last June, when Margaret did come before you, she did mention the smell, the conditions, the unsealed floors, and that has not changed. So we would like you to see that.
Yeah, so basically what you'll be looking at is for us just to continue the initial conditional approval and subject to us visiting it and then having the applicant come in for another hearing. Correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
I assume we could impose new conditions, or is that the case? Are we not allowed to do new conditions?
You may condition additionally.
Okay, thank you.
All right, being that this is a public meeting, are there members of the public who'd like to speak either in favor of the applicant or against the applicant? Okay, let's do. Wait.
Excuse me.
We don't speak out of turn, number one, and we don't speak without being sworn in. So first, just raise your hand if you could, for those in favor of Zoomies. Okay, if you could take turns getting up to the podium, if you want to speak, come to the podium, state your name and address and be sworn in. And even if it's a couple of sentences, you have to be sworn in. Thank you very much, sir.
And respectfully, Mr. Chair, if I could just address the board,
Yes.
I just wanted to suggest that we make sure not to divide the speakers based on being for or against the proposal during
Okay.
public comment.
Okay. Thank you for the suggestion.
Please raise your right hand, state your name and address for the record.
Rossler, and I live at 3219 Calle de Molina in Santa Fe.
You solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you have in reference to this item shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, and do this under the penalties of perjury? Sworn in, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
I've been coming to Zoomies for the last 2.5 years. I was at another place and to be negative about it, but they've been phenomenal for my club. When I,
Hold on, if I could interrupt you, if you don't mind using the mic, so we want to make sure we get, it's right in front of you, sir, just so we can get it on the record.
they've just been exceptional with my
yeah.
dog for the last 2.5 years. 2 blocks before I get there, she's barking like crazy. And when I get to the front door, she pulls me in and she says, "Okay, Dad, I had enough of you. I want to go be with the staff." And the staff goes above and beyond. That she just loves it there. And when I go to pick her up, she doesn't want to come with me. She just has a ball. They just, service is just incredible. I just can't say enough about it.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else want to speak, either in favor or against? Yeah, there's 3 people. I saw hands up, maybe 4. Yeah, if you want, you can line up, or you can just get up at time, but
Please raise your right hand, state your name and address for the record.
Robert Milstein, 1000 Marquez, apartment B2.
You solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you have in reference to this item shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, and do this under the penalties of perjury?
I do.
Sir Milstein is sworn in.
thank you.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. I had a long speech prepared, and then you asked so many questions that I can forgo a lot of it, because I think it's been well established that Mr. Biles has been unable to comply with a lot of the conditions originally put in the SUP. And I would just want to say that, for example, that the dumpster was condition number 5 in last year's conditions of approval, and it simply says incomplete, and I would characterize it as nothing done at all. It's an ugly dumpster. It hasn't been moved from the street. It's just terrible. The Playroom E construction was done. And that's kind of concerning, because last year's condition 6 said the approval of the SUP applies only to the existing square footage and does not include the applicant's proposed expansion to the additional suite. Indeed, if one reviews the dialogue between the Board of Adjustment and Ms. Moore from last year's hearing, you'll find that Member Painter expresses concern about having sufficient parking for another business to occupy the deli space. That's on page 14. And that Chair Friedman on page 15 asks about the parking requirements for a restaurant. But Mr. Biles has already taken over this space, and I keep pointing out he spent a lot of money on it. Condition 12 says that prior to the building permit application, the curb would be painted on the north side of Camino de la Marquez in federal yellow, stenciling no parking. Somehow that simple task was not achieved, despite a comment from the staff in last year's report, which is in section 5, part A, in last year's report that was presented to you guys, quote, "The applicant shall inform their customers to use the parking lot for drop-off and pickup and not the parking area along Camino de la Marquez." That's all they've been doing since. The vast majority of people still park there. And during the dark days of winter, personally, I had 2 uncomfortably close calls with doors opening quickly. So in fact, even after a year, the applicant describes this project. So the applicant, this is, I think it's attachment C. The applicant describes this in their letter to you as simply pending. And I don't know what it's pending. I mean, it's painting a curb and stenciling something. I don't understand. Okay, and so this kind of nonchalance, you could say, well, maybe it happened under pressure or something, but it's longstanding. The ENN questionnaire submitted in advance of the November 2022 meeting, which was Exhibit C to last year's hearing, the applicant on that form, it's under the question about effect on the protection of the physical environment of having Zoomies in the neighborhood would be, and this is a quote, "no impact," even though that question says specifically, what about the garbage? It's unbelievable to me that they would say it would have no impact. So it seems to me that the applicants spend time and money on things that would expand the business. That's their priority. They built Playroom E, but they've done nothing for their neighbors. And that brings me to really my biggest issue, which is that the solution being proposed is worse than the problem. Okay, so in the annual review summary that's you guys got tonight, the staff describes that the loading and unloading of pets on Camino de la Marquez is an improper use one that might have been less likely, I would assert, had the applicant seen fit to spend a few dollars and hours to paint the curb. And that the causes, the report says that using the curb causes congestion and safety concerns, their words. The report continues, the applicant has decided to relocate their primary entrance and lobby to face the parking lot, and that this will mitigate the congestion problem on Camino de la Marquez. And that's no doubt true, but no consideration, none, is given to what the impact on moving the entrance would be to the residents living immediately north of the parking lot. So first, let me remind the members, some of you might remember me, I came to the meeting, there was a big hearing in here in June, and I came to a little conference room meeting in July, and I showed you about once you ask Zumi clients to turn on Marquez Place, it's kind of game over for our little quiet neighborhood. And I have that map again if you want to see it. So I suggest that the only win-win solution was to change the traffic flow on Camino de la Marquez, and I still believe that's true. But let's begin with the Exhibit E to last year's hearing. On its top page under access and parking, we'll learn that, quote, the access to the project will be via Marquez Place. That was with the previous architect. The access was going to be on Marquez Place. And it continues, it says, the entrances are within close proximity of a stop sign intersection of Marquez Place and Camino de la Marquez. So nowhere near the back parking lot. That went out the window. And what would that mean? Zumi's opens at 6 in the morning. I parked outside their front door this morning at 7:27, because that's just when I came down from a walk. And I sat there for 15 minutes. 4 cars came in with dogs. Each dog drop results in 3 car doors opening. The owner gets out, closes her door or his door. It's almost all women though. And then the dog gets out, you close the door, and then the owner gets back in the car and closes the door. So when somebody drops off a dog, the 3 car doors closing. So 12 car doors in the random 15 minutes I happen to pick. So what can you expect to happen? Go back to last year's Exhibit E, which is a report from Walker, which includes a report from Walker Engineering on page 10. With the expansion, Walker included the expansion, and with the expansion, into Playroom E, he estimates 31 clients per hour. He also writes that 75% of folks drop off their dogs before work, when why else open at 6 in the morning. So let's be nice and say only 20 dog drops per hour. And say those for 2 hours from 6:30 to 8:30, that's 40 drops for 120 car doors closing, an average of 1 a minute from 6:30 to 8:30. So what I would ask you to do is take a moment and imagine that I parked on your street, down the block a little bit, at 6:30, and every minute for 2 hours, I open and close my car door. Okay, and it could get worse, right? Because they're expanding, they could do more business. And they asked last year, and you guys granted this, the release of the condition of 100 dogs. So that they could have more than 100 dogs. So if they're going to have 100 dogs, because they want to have more than 100 dogs, and 75% of them come before work, that's 75 dogs, the 75 dog drops, that's 225 car drops. I mean, car doors closing and opening, right? And that's in 2 hours. 225 car doors. So, facing our building. So yeah, moving the entrance to the parking lot is a solution to the congestion problem in Camino de la Marquez, but one that comes totally to our expense. And I would add, as my friend said, that in their discussion of doing things at Zumi's, the neighbors were not mentioned. So in sum, I feel the applicants lax in compliance. They didn't even get the notice right for this meeting, which was supposed to happen last month. And it's not new, right? They didn't get the notice to me about ENN. They didn't handle the obvious odor from the dumpster and then close it even with something temporary, as one of you guys suggested. There's a lack of performance with regards to the conditions, the dumpster, the curb painting, so on. So it seems to me that the review, having to come back here a year later to review the SUP, is insufficient to inspire compliant, let alone good behavior on the part of the applicant. And I therefore feel the SUP should either be discontinued or something has to change. And if you can't discontinue the SUP, then at least I would ask that you put some teeth into it. And the work to force them to change the traffic flow on Camino de la Marquez and keep the traffic away. If you can't do that, then I don't see how you can allow, the whole idea is that you're doing a business within 200 feet, and we're taking that business and moving it from the south side of the building away from the residents and saying, bring all the noise to the north side where we live and do it at 6 o'clock in the morning. I don't understand how that solves anything. And so I think letting them stay open until at 6 a.m. and put the the entrance where they want to would be an outrage. I think they should spend the money not on moving the lobby and moving all these things around. They should spend it on fixing the traffic. Or my favorite choice is there's an empty building across the street called the Wells Fargo Bank. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Please raise your right hand, state your name and address for the record. You solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you have in reference to this item shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, and do this under the penalties of perjury. Mr. Friedman is sworn in, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And just for the public, we have no relation. I think other than, I think you being at the first hearing, we've never seen each other before.
Yeah, so, years ago, when the restaurant that we mentioned was closing, Alex.
And Mr. Chair, you may want to direct the member of the public to speak into the mic. I think the mic is
Yeah,
isn't
we've done
picking
that
up, and
before.
I don't think the recording
you.
picked up his name.
Thank you.
You need me to repeat anything? Okay.
That's good.
So 2 years ago, I was there when Alex was closing the restaurant, and the owner was there. And I knew the building had been recently sold, and he had filled me in a little bit about, their demeanor and stuff, but I said to him, this is where I said to him, I'd really appreciate it if we could get the dumpster moved. Because even then with the food waste in it, there was an odor problem. And I'm talking about, with Santa Fe weather, especially on very hot days, it can be pretty breathtaking. And I don't remember his name, but the owner that's been talked about literally said to me, I don't have to do anything unless you make a formal complaint. And with that, he got on his cell phone and left in his Tesla. That left me pretty stunned. And that's actually what led to a series of events and my doing research through the permit department, the planning department, the permit department that has led us here today. Okay. Mr. Biles, when we had the first,
Speak into the mic, please.
I said, why are you using this building? It's an antiquated building. It's got a terrible structure. And he said to me, I've already signed a long-term rental agreement. What became obvious over time was that he had never done any of what Mr. Milstein referred to as due diligence to research the fact that Zumiez previous to him had no permits. The yard had been built illegally. That finally got taken down. I kind of question when the recent renovations were being done because they were all done on weekends and mostly at night by some undefined crew. I don't know how to frame that, but it seemed a little bit questionable whether there were actually permits for that and whether it was legitimate, whether there was something else going on. I don't know. I can't say anything. I empathize in a way with Mr. Biles, but I just feel like it's been very irresponsible how things have been handled. Our main concerns were the noise, the dumpster, the parking, and none of those things have really been resolved. They've done a lot of great renovations on the inside. I was at their open house last night, sleeping with the enemy a little bit, and it looks beautiful. I mean, Steve Rossler is a patient of mine and he loves Zumiez. He's always telling me how he loves Zumiez. I love Zumiez too. My dog, loves dogs. That's not the point here. The point is kind of fitting a square peg in a round hole or something like that and putting the cart before the horse, that the neighborhood and the building itself are really questionable for this usage. The new renovations that have been done in the much mentioned, I think, Suite E or something. Is there any soundproofing? Because if the dogs are in that room, we're going to be back to square one where the sound is the issue. That sound echoes down Marquez Place because of the environmental building acts like a soundboard. And people in the lofts, which are much more than 300 feet away, also complained about the barking. So, there's a lot of kind of promises and unknowns, and we're going to do this and potential fixes, but nothing is really absolute, clear, or defined. I think that's all I really have to say. I don't have any malice. I do wish the dumpster had been dealt with a lot sooner. You know, I don't know if you folks remember, but my driveway is literally where you're sitting. And I don't have to go near the dumpster to smell it. It's just comes that way. It's just all around that area. Their so-called improvement of the dumpster was the plastic lid on top. Nothing else has changed. The dumpster's been the same or the equivalent for how many years? I've been there for 15 years. You know, I don't know if there's this hermetically sealed up kind of thing that can be done, but my point has been all along of like, is this the appropriate place for this? I know that, you know, I know it's a C2 zoning, but there's got to be some boundaries and limitations on that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Please raise your right hand, state your name and address for the record.
Jennifer.
Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you have in reference to this item shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, and do this under the penalties of perjury? Ms. McMath is sworn in, Mr. Chair.
One clarifying question just before I start. Am I allowed to ask the city questions? Fantastic. So I am a client of Zoomies, and so is my dog. I am wondering what liability the city has to rent or lease a building that is not ADA compliant.
I'll address the Board of Adjustment, but I'll respond to your question.
Thank you, Heather.
Tara Friedman, members of the board, ADA compliance is critically important to the city. And that is the primary reason that was a condition of approval last year. So it would be best if ADA compliance had occurred by now. And certainly the city enforces the rules and the regulations. But at this point, we have not received any comment from the state level or private organization that is involved with ADA enforcement. So that would be the choice of the city, is to have it done by now.
Yeah,
you.
I guess so to just follow that up, if we're asking for the burden to be put on Zoomies, but withholding the law, shouldn't that be on the landlord or the city to comply? Why would they, out of curiosity, why would they have to be the one to foster that burden? If it's your law, or you're allowing this landlord to rent.
Tara Friedman, members of the board.
And Mr. Chair, if I can intervene, I understand that staff has been willing to answer a couple of questions here,
Yeah,
but
we don't want
generally,
this to go on.
Oh, certainly. I have a few, I just have a few other clarifying questions.
That's your last one.
Oh, so I'm no longer allowed to talk.
You can ask me. And if
Okay.
I can't answer it, then I'll ask the staff.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
You're there to speak in favor or not in favor, really not that come up and ask a series of questions. That's not the role of public comment.
Okay, well, would the council be in favor of seeing specifications for dumpsters? And would the neighborhood be in favor of seeing specifications? I've heard a lot of comment on the dumpster didn't get done, but not a lot of comment on here's what we're looking for. Would everyone be willing to look for that?
I think the board is considering how the dumpster is right now and necessary improvements to the dumpster.
So would you be willing to look at some specifications such as bare dumpsters or bear proof dumpsters or any other type of mitigation?
Go ahead.
Yes, of
Yes,
course,
Ms.
Mr.
White.
Chair. So just to interject really quickly, these dumpsters are city approved as issued by ESD. So these are serviced by the city and do require it to be infrastructure that can be easily dumped by our crew members. So that's something to keep in mind here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Heather.
And Chair Friedman, to follow up on that, section 14.8.4 landscape and site design, there are specific requirements as to buffering and storage of dumpster facilities so that it is not substantially visible from any public street, way, or place or any adjacent residential property. The design is up to the applicant with approval by the city.
Thank you. I think that answers
you.
the question.
It sure does. Thank you. Thank you.
Please raise your right hand, state your name and address for the record.
Rachel Wood. I live at 1000 Marquez Place, Unit C1.
You solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you have in reference to this item shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, and do this under the penalties of perjury?
Yes. Yes.
Ms. Wood is sworn in, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yes, I was here a year ago and spoke. My main concern was the noise. I'm 3 rows down from Zoomies, and I'm just here to support Hacienda Cordova community and Seth and Rohit, and there's a couple other people here. And so yeah, I'm just really surprised they've worked so much on the inside and not on the outside. It really is an eyesore. There's pieces of concrete falling from the building at the base. And just disappointed that no soundproofing has happened. So I was on my patio, I'd say 6 days ago, and for a few nights, and it was 11:30 at night, and there was a loud dog barking. And I even went down the street at 11:30 to see if like part of the back door was open or something, because it's so loud for me. So it just seems like there's a lot of shells that should have been done. So that's all I have.
Thank you for your comments, ma'am.
Please raise your right hand, state your name and address for the record.
Randy Coleman, 22 Fonda Road, Santa Fe, 87508.
You solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you have in reference to this item shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, and do this under the penalties of perjury?
I do.
Mr. Coleman is sworn in, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
So my profession is enterprise architecture. One of the things that I know is that everything's connected to everything else. To use a military thing, once you have a plan, that as soon as you enter the battle and the battle is getting the work done, the executing that plan requires a lot of flexibility and a lot of things to fall in the right way. And they don't always do that. So I see Zoomies trying to do the best they can under the circumstances. I've heard him spend a tremendous amount of money that he didn't anticipate have to spend, and make a commitment to spend more, make a commitment to time at his own risk when his risk is wrapped around his landlord, but he's willing to take that risk. That sounds like a pretty solid position for Zoomies that I would give. I went to the open house yesterday, and I walk with this. And one thing I know is that not everything is black and white. You can get things done. There's a ramp there, and I can walk up it, okay? So sure, they'll be ADA compliant, but they're not ADA compliant at the moment. I mean, maybe by law, but people can get in that building. People can get out of the building safely. And I'm proof of that. I did it in the monsoon yesterday. He had a food truck parked on I guess it's the east side. And in my conversations with him, he stated that's where it's intended for people to drop off their dogs and pick up their dogs, not the parking lot. Of course, the ramp runs right alongside, He's going to have a lobby there. You have to walk to the lobby. He's doing the work. Okay, he's getting the stuff done. Don't play black and white games that say, we're 49% of the way done. So, you know, you get a black star. He's taking the risk. Let him get the job done. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? Thank you all for taking the opportunity to express yourselves. The public portion of this meeting is now closed for this case. Does the board have any other questions of staff or the applicant at this time? I have one question for the applicant. So one of the members of the public indicated that construction was just going on mostly on weekends and evenings. And I wanted to know, you don't have a crew there working during the day? What's going on?
It just all depends on our availability of passing the inspections and what we've been allowed to do with the city. At times, that process has been challenging to get a little bit done and then to have to stop and take care of some things that are out of our control, like electricity and so forth. But when we have the green light to get something done, we've been able to put the energy into it. I would have loved this to be done 6 months ago. I've done projects of this scope and much greater in a third of the time. And there's just some challenges that have been put forward on our side that we've been trying to navigate through. And it's all completely out of pocket on my part. So I've been trying to mitigate the expenses as much as I can. But at this stage, like I said, I'm willing to just go all in and cover all the costs.
Is there anything stopping you from having a crew there during the day, though?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, we try to manage within the operations that we have as well.
Right.
Because we have a lot of doggy parents that count on us. But we have a plan, as Hugh mentioned, it's step by step, where we could begin work on the inside. And if you could see the work that we've done on the new suite, that's exactly what we're going to do on the inside to mitigate the smell issues and so forth, and the sound issues once we're able to do it. But it's one step at a time. We have to have the space to move the dogs into the former deli to where we could start doing construction inside. But we're in that place right now. And I think as soon as the end of the week, we're going to start moving dogs in to Playgroup E, which is the old deli, and be able to immediately start the work on the inside. And like I said, I think we could get the entire inside work done in a month if we're really pushing ourselves.
Okay.
I would like to have a little more time than that, but I think we could get it done in a month.
Thank you. Appreciate your answer. Yes.
I have one clarifying question. To execute on putting the dumpster enclosure and moving the dumpster, does that require a building permit? Or have you just been coupling that work with the general rework of the parking lot?
The dumpster enclosure specifically, yes, that's a building permit item. The work in phase 1, which is interior work related to finishes, is not permit required work. And that was clarified with the inspectors and with planning.
I would just like to add that this process with the parking lot and the dumpster and how they connect has been extremely frustrating for me. And as Joseph mentioned, we were waiting for the final approved version from our landlord so that the dumpster portion can be included in that piece of it. But again, I think we could just get it moving. We could just get it moving and just do it our way.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yes.
I could ask a question real fast. or maybe it's board here too. Is it worthwhile going back through the conditions of approval? Some of them said that by June 2024, they would be done and they haven't been started. We need to go through each single one and ask the applicant when they think they can have it done.
I mean, that's your prerogative if you wish to do that, Member Painter.
Well, it's either that or we say everything has to be done in 6 months and you come back to us and if it's not done, and
Well, I mean, staff made a recommendation of what we should do within 6 months. So if you don't agree with that and you have other questions that you want to ask, you certainly your prerogative to ask those questions.
well, it's not that I don't agree with it. I think it's a great idea. I think 6 months is appropriate. I just want the applicant to say, yes, we can have everything done in 6 months. If we say you got to be done in 6 months and he says, no way I can do it, then
Well, I think I asked the applicant that question. He answered it, but if you have a follow-up question, feel free to ask him.
I'll put an emphasis on that. If we can't get done in 6 months, then we have problems.
that's everything.
Pardon?
That's everything on the checklist that we had for conditions.
Yes.
And you're confident working with the landlord, you'll be able to get it done, and
I can't,
I know you.
that'll be a separate issue. We'll just, I'll just have to deal with that on my own with lawyers, unfortunately.
Well, you could adopt a landlord's plan for the for the parking and then just move in that direction if you wanted to too, right?
And I believe that's in front of the city.
Okay.
currently, That version, and it's
All right.
been in front for a while.
All right, well, that's a separate issue for the city side. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant while he's standing there? Okay, thank you, sir. All right, what's the pleasure of the board?
I'll make a motion that we follow the staff's recommendation to extend the period for another 6 months before we give, I guess, final approval or no approval. I guess it's one or the other in 6 months.
Along with a site visit and a subsequent hearing?
Well, somebody tells me the dumpster stinks, I believe them, I don't know that I have to go out there and stick my nose in it and say, yeah, you're right, it stinks.
I don't want to stick my nose in the dumpster, but I would like for my own eyes to see what's going on.
I'm not opposed to it.
Okay. All right, so with that caveat, that friendly suggestion,
Yeah,
that's your
yeah,
motion?
I would still make the motion.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second to that motion? All those in favor? Yeah, discussion.
So I love animals. I love the idea of zoomies, but you guys need to be good neighbors. And if I remember correctly, when we had this before us a year ago, the original time frame was 6 months, and we agreed to send it to a year because of the difficulties in the building trades, et cetera, that you needed the year. And here we are at a year. And the stuff that affects your neighbors is the stuff that hasn't been done, not the interior, and I understand you're moving chess pieces and all of that, but this is, I think, Member Painter sort of implied this. This is where the rubber meets the road. You've got to be good neighbors and you need to take care of the problems that the neighbors have told you are a problem in this 6-month period if we agree to extend it. Because you've got to be good neighbors. That's the whole point. So I just want to say, I second the motion, but you need to understand that if we're in the same place in 6 months, it's going to be a different conversation, I believe.
Yeah. For the record, I agree with those sentiments. Thank you for expressing them. Okay, any other discussion? So we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor of approving Board Member Painter's motion? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Not opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. No, let's wait. Thank you everyone for appearing and speaking. We appreciate your input. Let's take why don't we take a 10-minute break before we go on to the next case? All right, let's get started with our next case. Everybody, can we sit if you're in here for this case? And everyone who's not, if you want to go home, have a good evening. All right. So, new business case number 2024-8158, 1443 South St. Francis Drive for a special use permit. And Carly, you're up.
Yes, I am back with you again. In this case, speaking about the Animal Wellness Center. So to remind you about the intent of special use permit, as I told you in the previous case, this is a brand new one. We're looking at flexibility in providing, regulating or preventing specified uses within specific and various districts, making sure that they're compatible with existing and desired land use patterns. In this case, it's also within 200 feet of residential properties. So a quick project summary. Animal Wellness Center is an existing business within the city of Santa Fe, currently at 1313 South St. Francis Drive. So if you're headed northbound, they're on that right side. They're proposing that they move to 1443 South St. Francis Drive. It's about 500 feet south of their existing space. And this proposed site would be a larger space of 3,734 total square feet. They would only be serving clients within that, first floor. There are 2 floors in the existing building that used to be an insurance broker's office. The second floor would be proposed for employee break space and the possible accommodations of, any sort of staff member that would need to stay overnight in the rare case that they had to accompany an animal. The applicant has not proposed any external improvements to the building. That'll come into effect later. We'll talk about that more. And moving this 500 feet down the road would help them hire additional vet techs, vets, have 4 examination rooms as well as a surgical space, and allow their employees to have a break room upstairs, as I mentioned. So they hosted their ENN, they as in their agent, New Mexico Land Solutions in this case, on March 4th, 2014. There were a couple community members in attendance. They had a couple questions about kenneling animals overnight, possible boarding situations, traffic, as well as circulation. During this presentation, they were able to demonstrate the access to the site. It would be one way, as you can see in this site plan, and they have existing adequate parking, which is another concern of the adjacent neighbors. So just to look at a couple aspects of the project that came to top of mind when we were doing our analysis, according to Chapter 14, parking is determined in this case according to service area. The area that is serving the customers, of course, in the case of a vet clinic, are the exam rooms, the surgical space, the waiting room, anywhere you're going to be standing with a pet. So this required 10 spaces, which are required and available on the existing site. Landscaping did come before our technical review team, and it was requested that a couple corrections were made before they could occupy the building. This include, removing tree stumps, weeds, Siberian elm whips, and saplings, as well as, the implementation of a gravel strip along South St. Francis between the business and the road. That right-of-way space was previously used for parking that is not allowed by NMDOT and has been rectified by the applicant. Other areas of concern were water usage, traffic generation, noise generation, and attenuation. These all came up fine during our analysis. Water usage is expected to continue. We looked at their current usage over the last 3 years in their current space right down the road, and we're not expecting them to have anything above their average of 0.27 acre feet of water annually. As for traffic, we're moving that demand down the road. A traffic analysis impact was not required. And then as for noise and noise generation and attenuation, any sort of overnight care would be facilitated through a soundproof room. And I will go into that a little bit further in our criteria later on. So looking specifically at our special use criteria, the first criteria in this is the Board of Adjustment's ability to grant a special use permit. Of course, Chapter 14 does allow that, and it is within the authority of the BOA and the Planning Commission to grant a special use permit. As for criteria 2, this was answered by both staff and the applicant. The applicant was not required to answer the previous criteria. Criteria 2 is satisfied by the applicant and supported by staff. While staff has determined that public interest is not defined in chapter 14, that the reuse of this existing office space will not adversely affect any of the adjacent properties, including C1 and residential uses, and it would provide a necessary service to the community through their expansion. The applicant did reply that it would not adversely affect public interest due to the site being an existing office, and it did not warrant a traffic impact analysis, so that concern was also not against the public's interest. As for criteria 3, we answered that as staff as well as the applicant answered that. Our answer is that the proposed veterinarian clinic is compatible with existing C1 uses and residentially zoned properties within 200 feet. The hours of operation are an appropriate scale to be compatible. And many of the existing structures in this area are occupied already by office and light commercial uses with similar operating hours. As you can see, this is just down the road from their existing site. The applicant in this case did also say that their clinic is compatible with the existing C1 use, and it is in line with many of the existing structures providing office and light commercial uses. So, as I mentioned, there are some more specific standards, including that soundproof room requirement that go along with veterinary establishments as established by Chapter 14. That's Chapter 14-6.2 C8, and it has 4 criteria. The first stating that a vet clinic can only treat animals that are domestic household of a domestic household nature or capable of being trained and housed with a family dwelling unit. So that's not really an issue in this case because they're only treating dogs and cats. The facilities can't contain a external kennel, boarding areas, training areas, breeding, or the exercising of animals. Also not an issue. There will not be any external kennels or any of those other activities I listed previously. Criteria C, overnight boarding of animals for medical purposes is only accommodated through soundproof rooms, and that would be meeting the requirement. They have said that they will accommodate the rare case where they have to have animals overnight using those soundproof rooms. And then criteria D, in the case of continuous or repetitive noise, that would then be investigated. They are understanding that. Currently, their site 500 feet down the road has not had any sort of complaints about noise or subject to investigation. So, after taking all of those criteria into account, as the case planner, I do recommend a condition of approval, an overall approval, that condition being the restriping of the 10 parking lot spaces to optimize space and clarify ADA spaces. So with that, Mr. Chair, do you have any questions?
I specifically don't have questions. Are there questions from the board at this time? Yes, Member Painter.
I understand what you said correctly. Trying to think how to say this. Sounds like the criteria for the conditional use is placed on the first floor only, and you're only used as the square footage of the first floor, and you didn't use the square footage of the second floor. Is that right?
In this case, yes, Mr. Chair, if I may, Board Member Painter, it's conditioned on the entire building. However, when we look at the service area for the parking calculation, that's only based on the first floor. That makes sense.
It does. I was just wondering if it sounds like from what I read, I think if I get it right, the soundproof room would be upstairs, and if a dog had to stay overnight, they would stay upstairs with one of the people who work there. So it sounds like the upstairs is used as part of could be used as part of the facility, but it doesn't bring patients in upstairs. So I understand the parking thing. I think I'm okay.
Correct. And there's a floor plan included in the packet for this evening, but it would apply to the entire building.
Not the parking.
Correct.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff at this time? Thank you so much, Carly. Okay, the applicant is here. Please state your name and address and be sworn in.
Please raise your right hand, state your name and address for the record.
Nathan Manzanares with New Mexico Land Solutions. I'm the applicant's agent. We're located at 915 Mercer Street, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I understand I'm under oath.
Do you solemnly declare and affirm that the testimony you have in reference to this item shall be the truth and nothing but the truth, and do this under the penalties of perjury?
I do.
Mr. Manzanares is sworn in, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, board members, thank you for your time. I want to first thank Carly. We did not prepare a presentation. She did such a good job of explaining and did a very thorough review of the application. And, you know, our clients, Animal Wellness, are local here. They've been doing this for a long time. They outgrew their prior space and want to move just down the road. As mentioned, they've done a great job. There's never been any complaints or concerns on the prior establishment. And we're in agreement with all of staff's conditions of approval. And we just, stand for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant? All right. Being that this is a public hearing, are there any members of the public who wish to speak either in for or against the application? Okay, let the record show that there are no members of the public who wish to speak either way, and so I'm going to close the public portion of the hearing. So, any questions for staff or the applicant? If not, what's the pleasure of the board?
I make a motion to approve the special use permit for animal wellness,
Subject to the conditions?
subject to the conditions of the city.
Okay. Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Mr. Cherry, I think I didn't hear if we got a second on the motion.
Yes, member Deering second the motion. Okay. the
apologize.
No, that's quite all right. All right, the motion carries. Congratulations, folks. All the best. You do great work. Thank you for your service. My dogs thank you for what you do. We're not just for the record, we're not customers, but I support the profession wholly. All right. Thank you. All right, staff communications. I know we have something else on the agenda. We're legal issues and board meeting protocols. So is Rebecca?
Hey, everyone. Yeah, I had I have a presentation, just kind of a review of some procedures for the new board members. I think there were, we'd done this at a previous study session, but not all members of the board were able to attend. So I was just going to do a kind of a quick version of the presentation for the whole board at the meeting tonight.
Thanks for doing this, Rebecca. We appreciate it.
Certainly. So I think what I'm going to try to do is present from my computer. So let's see if this works.
We can see it.
Okay, great. Are you able to see the presentation now? Okay. So the main topics of this presentation are going to be the following 6 topics, which I'll just be discussing in brief. So specifically, we're going to be talking a little bit about Open Meetings Act, ex parte communications, authority of the board, Robert's rules, very briefly, IPRA, and review and approval obligations for the board. With respect to the Open Meetings Act, one of the main concerns is quorums, and making sure that the meeting is any discussions about public business held by a majority of the members are open to the public. So any meeting of any quorum of the members that involves a discussion about public business needs to be advertised beforehand, and the public needs to be invited to attend and listen. Action items need to be noticed at least 72 hours ahead of time. We want to avoid rolling quorums, and so those are basically when you can have an informal quorum, situations where you might have, three members of the board texting about public business, and then one member from that text chain communicating with another person. Issues like that can create a quorum, even though there's not a public meeting, there's no formal meeting, not all the members are. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I thought there was a question. But basically, when all members aren't necessarily, you can still have a quorum, even though not all members are in the same room at the same time, having the same discussion at the same time. A quorum can still be created, over the course of multiple communications at different times. And so we just want to be careful to avoid that. Ex parte communications are also something to be mindful of. When the board acts as a decision maker on matters affecting people's property interests, board members have to be and also appear to be impartial. And so conflicts of interest or apparent conflicts of interest have to be disclosed at the hearing, and interested members are to recuse themselves, and that is in the code. Code section 14-2.8G provides that members of a land use board shall not communicate with any interested parties outside of the public meeting and hearing concerning the merits or substance of the hearing, except in writing, with writing that's filed with the land use director in advance of the hearing, within the prescribed time period, giving copies to all other known parties' interests and members of the board. Additionally, the rule provides that or the code section provides that a member also shall not communicate with any other persons outside of the planning and land use department, outside of the public meeting and hearing concerning the merits or substance of any quasi-judicial item coming before them. And essentially, all of the matters that come before the Board of Adjustment are going to be quasi-judicial, at least all the action items. So unlike the governing body, the board wouldn't have a legislative function where, you might want to communicate with members of the public about, things involving the community. Generally, anything that's an action item that's going to be coming before the board is going to be quasi-judicial. And so the rules about ex parte communications are going to be part of that. Ex parte communications, I think I didn't give a definition before, but basically it's communications occurring outside the context of the public hearing, and they can be written or verbal. They can also include independent investigations or site visits. The rule 14-2.8G does prohibit site visits, and also requires that any members who receive communications disclose those on the record in the hearing, and provide that they shall recuse if they cannot be, if that board member cannot be fair and impartial because of that communication that they received or that separate knowledge that they obtained. If you do receive emails from members of the public, you're welcome to send those to staff. I know that you're members of the community, so you might not want people to feel like they're being ignored if they reached out to you. So someone from city staff can reach out to those individuals and let them know the circumstances. Some of the other considerations regarding recusal are related to due process. So in a quasi-judicial proceeding, all parties are entitled to a neutral adjudicator, as well as the appearance of impartiality. That issue was addressed by the New Mexico Court of Appeals in Bernalillo County versus Board of County Commissioners, or Benavides versus Bernalillo County Board of Commissioners, where it talked about interested parties in quasi-judicial zoning proceeding being entitled to an opportunity to be heard, to present and rebut evidence, and to a tribunal which is impartial in the matter. And the court also concluded in that case that where a due process violation is based on bias of the fact finder, what the court is going to be looking at is just whether there would be an appearance of bias rather than any evidence of whether there was actual bias. And so as Member Ip did earlier in the night, she was concerned about appearance of impropriety, or appearance of not impropriety, but impartiality, based on knowing one of the parties to a case. And so she recused herself. And so that's the proper procedure for quasi-judicial hearings. If there's any concern about appearance of impartiality, it's usually going to be best to recuse.
Rebecca, I have a question.
Yes.
So I was asked to leave, so recusing, I can listen to the meeting outside the room, but I shouldn't be in the room.
Yes, and so we generally, members step out of the room when they need to recuse themselves from something. I think the concern is that, there could be, potentially some impact on the other board members just by your presence, body language, things like that. It could potentially impact the course of the proceeding. And so that's the reason that people leave the room.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Just for clarification, I've been in your shoes before, so I've had to remove myself from the room. So that's what we typically do.
And some types of factors that might cause the appearance of impartiality include if a case that's pending before the board might benefit a board member or their business, could benefit a board member's close family member or their business, benefit a civic or religious group that a board member is a part of, and also potentially cases involving a board member's neighborhood. If it's something that, if it's a matter that has a wide-ranging effect, that might not necessarily create the appearance of impartiality. But if it's something close, something, that you live very close to, it's, right within your immediate neighborhood or impacts a board member directly, that might be a situation that could cause the appearance of impartiality or actual impartiality. And so, as we discussed, if you do recuse, leave the room and wait for the item to be done. So the authority of the Board of Adjustment comes from Santa Fe City Code Section 14-2.4. And so the Board of Adjustment has authority to issue final decisions to approve or deny the following matters. So those include special use permits, minor modifications, certain types of variances, and appeals of final actions of the land use director. And so that comes up when the land use director issues a formal written decision to an applicant, and the applicant appeals that decision, then those appeals would come to the Board of Adjustment for a de novo hearing. So when a matter does come before the Board of Adjustment, the things that are appropriate for the board to consider include the applicable criteria, for example, for a variance. And so those come from the code under section 14-3.16, lists certain approval criteria. You can also take the general plan or other applicable policy considerations into account. And any deviations from the criteria should ideally be addressed in the findings. And the person making the motion to approve or deny the application, it would be suggested that would probably be the appropriate person to note the findings. Sometimes that can be done by adopting staff's findings, for example, or the applicant's findings. You don't have to, the board member making the motion does not have to adopt those findings. And in some situations, the board member may wish to deviate from those findings as to one element, or may make different factual findings or different conclusions based on the code than the staff report did or than the applicant did. And so in those circumstances, you just want to make sure to note where your disagreement is when you're making the motion. Things that are not relevant for the board's consideration include who the applicant is. So it's supposed to be based on the property, not the owner or the applicant of the property. Who opposes the application would not be a consideration, although of course you do take public comment and that is testimony. So those can be facts that are for the board's consideration, but who is giving those statements would not be part of the board's consideration. And also any information that's not on the record would not be part of the board's consideration. You do have the option to postpone a decision on a matter if you feel that you need some additional information, including research on a topic that potentially staff or the city attorney's office could provide if needed. If there's not sufficient time to hear all testimony, including public comment, or if you just need, might need testimony from an additional city staff member. That comes up sometimes if there's a question that might need a statement from the city engineer, for example, like if you had a question about drainage or something like that, or a question about fire safety, might be a question for fire department. Generally, staff tries to have those people available if they're anticipating questions or an issue related to one of those topics, or traffic. Traffic comes up quite often for certain types of projects. So we do try to have those people available for questions. But in the event that somebody's not available, or a question comes up that staff wasn't anticipating and the board really feels that they can't make a decision without getting, they don't have complete information, they can't make a decision without getting information from that additional staff member, then that is an option. Then you could postpone a vote until a different date. The Board of Adjustment follows Robert's rules as well as the city rules and procedures. The Robert's rules are generally used when there's no applicable code section or resolution governing a given procedure. So Robert's rules fills in the gaps when we don't have any adopted guideline on a particular topic. A quorum is a majority of members, 4 for the Board of Adjustment. All communication is to go through the chair. The chair only votes in the case of a tie or if necessary to have the proper number of votes. And the board should do roll call votes on all cases and outcomes. The Inspection of Public Records Act applies to most records that are created by the city or most documents. Public is entitled to greatest possible information about government. The public has a right to inspect documents. Providing records is the responsibility of all public officers and employees, and requests would come through the city. And so we do have an IPRA office that handles requests and processes them and puts them into a system. So certain items are going to be protected by privilege or by some other exception to IPRA. The IPRA team reviews all those requests and releases documents that are not subject to an exception. Special use permits, purpose and intent of a special use permit is to allow flexibility in providing for regulating or preventing specified uses within various districts as provided in table 14-6.11. The goal of the special use permit option is to ensure compatibility with existing or desired land use patterns. It's required for certain uses so that potential detrimental effects may be reduced or avoided and conflicts in land use may be prevented. And they are necessary because of the wide variety of uses that are allowed within zone districts and the variety of existing sites and uses found in the community. Additionally, it gives the public an opportunity to weigh in on something that might be affecting the community, that might be kind of an unusual use of the property or something that's not standard. So the review and approval process for special use permits is as follows. So there's an ENN, followed by staff review, which includes application, DRT review, site visit, recommended conditions of approval and technical corrections. Then the matter is scheduled for a public hearing. The public hearing has to be publicly noticed. Staff makes a recommendation on the special use permit. Might recommend conditions of approval as well, if any are needed, as well as technical corrections, and we'll always prepare a report that sets out approval criteria that's usually included in the presentation as well. And then after a public hearing, staff prepares draft findings of fact and conclusions of law for the board to review and to consider adopting. We also have minutes made usually by a stenographer outside of the city. Sometimes, I guess for a special permit, you need an action letter, and then applications for building permits would follow. Just one thing to be mindful of is you don't have to adopt the findings of fact and conclusions of law as written and prepared by staff. The board does have the option of making changes to those, but we prepare them for you, and we try to get the board's findings as accurately as possible in those findings of fact and conclusions of law, especially if you're the motion maker. If you feel that something in those findings and conclusions did not accurately reflect your motion, that's the hearing is your opportunity to, the approval hearing is your opportunity to let us know that and make changes potentially if needed. Let's see. So special use permits and conditions of approval. So the Board of Adjustment can specify their own or adopt the staff recommended conditions that it deems necessary to accomplish proper development and to implement the policies of the general plan, including fences, walls, landscaping, parking, sidewalk and utility improvements, noise generation and attenuation, maximum number of employees or occupants permitted that relates to intensity of use, hours of operation, and periodic or annual review. Conditions may not be imposed that restrict the use to a specific group or person. As we did tonight, typically the motion would be to approve. If you were moving to approve and there were staff conditions, you wanted to move to include those conditions, you would move to approve the application with the conditions and technical corrections if there are any. You're also welcome to add your own, reject any of the conditions recommended by staff. Whatever you are asking whatever you would like to move to be approved, that should be in your motion. So you don't have to accept staff's recommendations, but you can. So necessary findings to grant a special use permit, land use board should make the following findings. Then this is just if you are going to grant the special use permit, that the land use board has authority under Chapter 14, that granting the special use permit does not adversely affect the public interest, and that the use and any associated buildings are compatible with and adaptable to building structures and uses of the abutting property and other properties in the vicinity of the premises under consideration. So if you feel that an application does not meet any of this criteria, then the special use permit should be denied. So moving on to variances, land use boards may approve variances to the provisions of Chapter 14 as provided in Section 14-2 and elsewhere in accordance with the code. Variances may be granted to provisions regulating the size, location, and appearance of structures, location and extent of open space, extent of grading, width and configuration of public and private roads, driveways and trails, and to similar standards for development established by this chapter. So variances can only be granted for those specific purposes, and the code does exclude certain types of variances. So the code does provide that variances may not be granted to provisions that restrict the type or intensity of principal or accessory uses permitted within a district, including limits on maximum residential density, and no variance shall be granted to any procedural rule. So variances can only be granted in certain circumstances if you find that the variance, if you find based on the evidence that you hear in the hearing that the variance would have to be granted to a provision, to a code section that restricts intensity of principal or accessory uses, or one of the other prohibited one of the other prohibitions, then you would not be able to grant the variance to the code section for that reason. The review and approval process is similar to special use permits. Variances also go through a review period with staff, which includes an application, DRT review, and possible imposition of conditions of approval or technical corrections by the DRT and staff. And the DRT is the development review team. And so that's a cross-disciplinary team of professionals that weigh in on different elements of the project. And so that can be traffic, that can be engineering, fire, water, as applicable. So those are different people that prepare a report and recommend conditions of approval or technical corrections based on their area of expertise. Variances also go to a public hearing, which is also subject to public notification procedures. Staff makes a recommendation, and then post-review, the board adopts findings of fact and conclusions of law based on its decision in the hearing. Variances also have specific approval criteria. I'm not going to read through all of these, but it's found in Code Section 14-3.16. And so you have to find that an application or property meets all of these applicable criteria in order to grant the variance. And so it has to have unusual physical characteristics that distinguish the land or structure from others in the vicinity. The parcel. I'm sorry. So these are options for special circumstances. So that's section 1 is it has to have special circumstances, and it can be any one of these 4, including being non-conforming. The special circumstances have to make it infeasible for reasons other than financial cost to develop the property in compliance with the standards of Chapter 14. So a person saying that it would just be too expensive to comply with the code would not meet approval criterion 2. The intensity of development cannot exceed that which is allowed on other properties in the vicinity. So in that district or that zoned area, couldn't exceed that extent of development is how intensity is defined in the code. And the variance has to be the minimum variance that will make possible the reasonable use of the land or structure, considering a couple of factors that are laid out in the code, including whether it could be used without variances for a different or lesser category or intensity of use. It has to be consistent with the purpose and intent of Chapter 14. Additionally, the variance, you must make a finding that the variance is not contrary to public interest. The code doesn't have a lot of guidance on what is the public interest. A lot of times you might want to look to the general plan, or staff will look to the general plan for guidance on what the public interest would be in a given situation. So you might be considering factors like safety and quality of life, but that's basically, it's a policy decision. And then there can be additional requirements or supplemental findings required by other provisions of Chapter 14. And so if staff feels that there are other provisions of Chapter 14 that apply to an application, they'll let you know about that. So this just talks about appeals of decisions of the land use director. And so appeal hearing procedures can be found in City Code Section 14-3.17. And the procedures for appeal hearings are come from a resolution, which is resolution 2011-24. And so basically it is so basically any hearings that come before you on appeal are going to be very similar to the public hearings that you have on special use permits or variances, but you'll have presentations from the appellant, which could be a member of the public, and the applicant also has an opportunity to give a presentation, or sometimes I guess when it's an appeal of the land use director, it's typically going to be the applicant that's making the appeal. And so they would give a presentation, staff gives a presentation on its report, and the board has an opportunity to ask questions of staff. The parties also have an opportunity to ask questions of staff and of witnesses. After a decision is made, a case can be appealed 30 days after final action. Final action is either the date a written decision is adopted, or if such body has not adopted findings of fact or conclusions of law within 35 days of the date of the vote deciding the matter is taken, then the date of final action is deemed to be the 35th day after the vote. And so this rule allows for finality even when a land use board does not meet or is not able to meet within 30 days and adopt those findings and conclusions. So a decision can still be appealable even though there is no written decision by the board. And appeals of decisions by the Board of Adjustment are then heard by the governing body. And that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions at this time?
Any questions? Go ahead.
Ms. Sherry, you said earlier, I forget exactly under what context it was, but a decision if the land use director made some kind of finding, it was appealable to the board, to us. And I forget the exact context of it. But my question was, if we I guess hear an appeal to his decision, is our decision then further appealable to the whole governing body, or?
No. So, and so I just wanted to, I'm actually Rebecca Minook Herman. Erin McSherry is the city attorney. I'm one of the assistant city attorneys. But decisions when you hear an appeal by the land use director, or an appeal of a decision by the land use director, if there's an appeal of the board's decision, then that appeal goes straight to district court.
Well, what you're asking is if we are hearing an appeal of the land use director and we make our decision, then is that decision of the board appealable to the governing body?
No, so those decisions go to district court.
Okay.
It's only if there's a public hearing, like for example, on a special use permit, and that gets appealed, that decision would go to the governing body on appeal. But when you're hearing an appeal, that becomes a final decision, and then that can be appealed to district court.
Right. Otherwise, they don't get two appeals, two cracks at appeal.
Right.
Any other questions for Rebecca?
Friedman,
Yes.
I have a question. Rebecca, you said that we can approve cases and add additional conditions or modify somehow. What if not every board member agrees with the additional conditions?
It has to be part of a motion, so that's.
Has to be part of the motion, and then, okay.
Yeah.
And then subsequent to that, another board member can motion to approve as written or as presented.
Yeah, or have other conditions.
Okay.
Sometimes it goes on for a while.
Hmm.
Correct, Rebecca? I usurped
Yeah.
you, so I apologize, but
No, thanks for jumping in. Yeah, that's correct. And yes, and it can go on for a while if it needs to.
Thank you.
good questions. Okay, Rebecca, thank you so much for taking the time to do that another time, second time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank
Great,
you.
great job.
No problem.
Any other communications from staff?
Yes, Chair Friedman, just a few things. With reference to all of the things that are going on with the planning team of the Planning and Land Use Department, we are pleased to announce that the contract has been approved and we will be starting a kickoff meeting for the general plan update next week with the consultant. So there's going to be a substantial and robust community engagement process that's associated with that. But the first item will be to actually develop a digital platform so that information from the city will be more accessible. So something like will be based in geographic information systems, which the public uses all the time through a website where you can select a property and pull up a subdivision plat, pull up building permits, any type of development plan. The intent is that people will be able to have access to that information and also maybe reduce our public records requests numbers as well, just so that it's readily available if there are any questions. And we also do want to improve the availability information of pending applications, on the website so that applicants can see an application between the early neighborhood notification meeting and the actual public hearing. So there are a lot of things that we would like to do in addition to developing a policy framework for the next 20 years, but also bring our technology available and up to standards of 2024. So we're excited about that project. The zoning code update project also is ending. We're nearing completion of phase 1. So we have 2 technical advisory committees, and the committees are looking at the final draft of the code hygiene section. So you might recall phase 1 was the code hygiene, reorganizing the code as it is and providing some clarifications, making it more readable. 1987 was a little less, fewer graphics were used. Let's just put it that way. So we're going to be using lots of graphics and making it understandable. And then we'll be launching into the key issues section, which is phase 2, after the adoption of the code by the governing body. So we will definitely keep you aware of the progress of that project and make presentations to you as well with the code update and provide that information to you if you are so inclined to be incredibly, thorough about reading a code. They're so exciting. But we are excited actually as planning nerds that we will have something that is more workable.
Great. Fine.
Yeah, my question is the documents, you said that it's going to be technologically superior, hopefully. Is it going to be searchable? I mean, are you going to be able to say, what you want to do and where can I do it kind of a thing within the code? Or are you because right now it's very clunky to try to find what your rules are in any given situation. And that's one of the things we hear from the public all the time is that trying to figure out where stuff is in the code is one of the hardest things to do. And so is it going to be like searchable, like a Word document search or?
Yes, Chair Friedman, Member Deering, it will be searchable, and we're going to try to organize things a little more logically, like demolition is in one section, but it also applies in historic districts and also applies elsewhere, and signage and the like. So
Someone could search for demolition in historic districts, hopefully, and get
Correct.
to the exact right.
Yes. That's
you.
Yeah, the code says don't for the historic.
right.
Is the same consulting firm doing the general plan that's doing the chapter 14?
No, Chair Friedman, it is the consulting firm for the general plan is WSP. They're a national planning firm. They'll be actually partnering with Design Workshop, the local design workshop. They also, WSP has an office in Albuquerque as well. So their Albuquerque team is going to be thoroughly engaged. One of the things that WSP will be able to do is shorten the time frame of the general plan update. on the side of the administrative functions, but not on the side of the engagement. So there still will be very robust engagement, but they will be able to produce some results and deliverables faster, which was appealing to the evaluation committee, the RFP.
Yeah, I'm really happy we're doing a general plan look and update.
It's way overdue.
Yep.
My first job out of graduate school was with the city in historic preservation. And
I remember,
the
well, I don't
general
remember
plan-
when you started, but I remember we were with historic preservation.
Right. And then the general plan update I was involved with last time. So it's exciting to hopefully see something that'll be more living. We're planning on the digital platform to trigger, updates, a step for it to be actionable. So there will be maps associated with budgeted capital improvements and then those aspirational improvements relative to transportation improvements, but also regular reporting through the website as well as to all the different boards and commissions of the city on those priorities and policy, priorities.
Great. Yes.
I could ask a question. The first thing you were talking about was everything's gonna be more digital and using GIS, it sounds like, kind of linking everything. Is all your staff pretty well trained in GIS, or if not, you guys gonna train them?
Chair Friedman, Member Painter, yes, we are all trained in GIS. Some of us are stronger than others. I mean, I could use some refreshing as to the functionality and being able to look things up. Absolutely, our staff, all of us can do that. But the management of the system will be through Esri and also through our IT staff eventually. But for the near term, it will be with the consultants.
Good stuff.
Yeah, we're excited.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Any matters from the board? I just want to welcome our newer board members. Thank you for joining us and for your willingness to serve the community. It's great. Appreciate it.
I'm not contagious.
Thank the Lord. It's no. Oh my God. I didn't know you had pneumonia. You didn't tell us. Oh, okay. All right. Well, this meeting is adjourned. Have a great evening, everyone.